Chapter 1196. Perhaps Dongqing Wudi's stiff expression was too obvious. Li Huaqing, who had been observing his emotional changes, directly misunderstood his meaning. He obviously didn't want to give Dongqing Wudi a chance to refuse. He had to protect Li Guangtu. It was important to win Dongqing Wudi's support. If Dongqing Wudi showed his support for Li Tianlan, then their next conversation would undoubtedly be much more difficult. We all understand the importance of the dark world. In recent years, the dark world has been very chaotic, and various influences have been reflected in all aspects. But this is also an opportunity for our Zhongzhou state. Li Guangtu's strength is obvious to all, and the foundation of the purgatory of heaven capital is also there. Their existence is very important to Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing deliberated over his words and said word by word. He spoke very slowly, so he seemed particularly cautious. He suddenly smiled and continued, "Of course, the knot between him and Tianlan is something that needs to be considered. Zhongzhou state should be able to solve this problem. Whether we are willing to accept it or not, the fact is in front of us. For now, the former Li family no longer exists. What appears in front of us now is Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital. I'm going to find a chance to have a good talk with Li Guangtu and let him recognize the reality. Tianlan, Li Guang, even Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu, their existence has a certain contribution to Zhongzhou state. That's good. Now the dark world is chaotic, but they are standing at the top of the dark world. I hope they can look outside and try to reduce some unnecessary friction." His smile slowly faded and became solemn. "I will warn Li Guangtu, even Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In the name of the parliament, I will ask them to maintain their respect for Tianlan in the future. Only by uniting can we have greater gains." "Do you think Tianlan will agree?" Dongqing Wudi took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a drag and asked slowly, "Tianlan is your son." Li Huaqing smiled, his eyes shining. "You're wrong about one thing," Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice. "Tianlan is indeed my son, but he left the family when he was a child. The Dongqing clan is now not qualified to ask him to do anything, let alone restrain him. Tianlan never owes anything to the Dongqing clan. On the contrary, we owe him too much." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time, then he twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, "In any case, Zhongzhou state must protect Li Guangtu. Wudi, you and I have known each other for many years. You know me and the importance of Li Guangtu to Zhongzhou state. Considering all aspects, keeping Li Guangtu here is, to some extent, a kind of protection for Tianlan. I don't believe that you don't understand this truth." He picked up a piece of beef and said slowly and firmly, "Li Guangtu must stay." The words were not loud, but he was incomparably resolute. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Huaqing coldly and did not speak for a while. Li Huaqing expressed his attitude. From another angle, his meaning was also very obvious. That was, no matter what Dongqing Wudi thought, he had to protect Li Guangtu. If Dongqing Wudi supported his decision, everyone would be happy. If Dongqing Wudi refused, Li Huaqing would do the same. After all, he was the president of Zhongzhou state. If he really insisted on protecting Li Guangtu, who really dared to touch him? If Li Tianlan really killed him in a rage, there would be no place for Emperor Dong's palace in the whole of Zhongzhou state. If Li Tianlan was rational and did not kill Li Guangtu, but also did not let him go, then Zhongzhou state would inevitably take corresponding measures to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace. Economic assistance in all aspects, public opinion propaganda in multiple channels, resource support in various fields, armament support, there was no doubt about the strength of Emperor Dong's palace now. But after all, the development time was a little short. They were far from reaching the level where they could still develop rapidly after leaving Zhongzhou state. The foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was indeed in Tianan, but Li Tianlan's foundation was in Zhongzhou state. If Zhongzhou state really made up its mind to cut off all support for Emperor Dong's palace, with the financial support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Emperor Dong's palace would not disappear, but it would inevitably lose the opportunity for the fastest development. They would either be in a deadlock without pain or itch, or they would leave Zhongzhou state completely. What Li Huaqing and Guo Wenian said was actually right. With Li Tianlan's current status, if he left Zhongzhou State, Star State, European Alliance, Snow Country, East Island, and many other countries would desperately come to recruit Li Tianlan to join them. As long as Li Tianlan was willing, they would be willing to kneel down and lick his boots. An absolutely invincible expert in the dark world could not be measured by some resources and money. It was no exaggeration to say that the current Li Tianlan was already a super heavyweight who could determine the fate of a superpower for decades to come. But if they really chose this way, only Li Tianlan and a small number of people in Emperor Dong's palace would leave Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State could not allow this to happen, which was tantamount to real treason. Under the fury of the parliament, the entire Emperor Dong's palace would be completely destroyed even if it could not leave Xianyuan City. This was the worst ending, which was not what Li Huaqing wanted to see, nor was it what Emperor Dong's palace was willing to bear. But even if it didn't go to this step, Zhongzhou State would suppress Li Huaqing in many ways. Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Li Guangtu, which would also make Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou State drift apart. Li Huaqing would also directly go to the opposite side of Li Tianlan. What did this mean? He was the president of Zhongzhou State. With this identity, he should not be on the opposite side of anyone. He suppressed the giant group and the southeast group, and gave up on the giant group. But no matter what he did, in essence, he was not an enemy of others. Even if he suppressed Emperor Dong's palace now, it was only for the balance of Zhongzhou State. But once he really went to the opposite side of Li Tianlan, the meaning was completely different. Li Tianlan would not have an easy time. In the future, Li Huaqing would not have an easy time either. This was tantamount to a lose-lose situation, which was also not what Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan were willing to bear. So Dongqing Wudi became the best buffer. If he persuaded Dongqing Wudi and let Dongqing Wudi talk to Li Tianlan about Li Guangtu on behalf of Zhongzhou State, this was undoubtedly the best situation. Li Huaqing did not want to become enemies with Emperor Dong's palace. All he wanted was balance. Li Tianlan was young and impetuous. Under impulse, he might do something that would make everyone regret, but Dongqing Wudi could definitely consider it for him. So Li Huaqing thought that the possibility of persuading Dongqing Wudi was still very high. And what he needed to pay was nothing more than some exchange of interests. Is this a threat? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then suddenly laughed. Must. You rarely say this word. On all kinds of occasions. It's not a threat. Li Huaqing shook his head. I just want to try to create a situation that everyone can accept. This is a discussion with you, or even a request. It doesn't matter. Li Guangtu can't be lost. Dongqing Wudi silently put out the cigarette but in the ashtray. Li Huaqing ate a piece of beef and suddenly smiled. It smells good. I heard from Lin that Hanbing sent it here? Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Huaqing intentionally or unintentionally, nodded, and said nothing. At this time, Li Huaqing mentioned Hanbing, which seemed to have some meaning. He is your right-hand man in the Border Control Corps. Have you ever considered transferring him to Yuzhou to help you? The task of the army headquarters is very heavy. Having a capable general can save a lot of effort. Li Huaqing continued to laugh. Dongqing Wudi also smiled and said calmly, the Border Control Corps is also a big business, and someone needs to take care of it. Li Huaqing unconsciously tapped the edge of the table with the chopsticks in his hand, as if he was hesitating about something. This hesitation only lasted for a second and then disappeared. He laughed and said calmly, you can let the Qing dynasty go. Dongqing Wudi suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing's smile was indifferent, and his face was inscrutable. Chapter 1197. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Huaqing silently and did not speak for 5 minutes. There was a plate of beef and 2 glasses of wine. In the smoke, Li Huaqing quietly tasted the beef in front of him, which was really tasty, and let Dongqing Wudi brainstorm in silence. Hanbing went to Yuzhou. The Bai Qing dynasty went to the border. If this was Li Huaqing's condition to get Li Guangtu back from Li Tianlan, it seemed to be too generous. Dongqing Wudi didn't have time to think about how generous it was, but he could clearly see Li Huaqing's sincerity and kindness from this so-called exchange. Dongqing Wudi silently picked up the glass in front of him, drank up the wine in the glass in front of him, and took a long breath. I'm not hostile to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing finally spoke again, with calmness in his faint smile. I will give Tianlan an explanation about the Li family, Phoenix Pavilion, and Kunlun City, which will satisfy him. What I want to do is very simple. It took us thousands of years to go from feudalism to democracy. This is historical progress and an inevitable trend. It's hard to understand how subtle it is. Invincible, if you are not in my position, it's hard to understand. I fully recognize Tianlan's ability and the height that Emperor Dong's palace can reach in the future. Xianxia state wants to see a heavenly son who can be supreme in the dark world, but I don't want this heavenly son to be supreme in Xianxia state and ignore everything. If all this happens, it means that we are reversing history, and it can't last long. There is no misunderstanding between Tianlan and me, but there are some unpleasantness. I think such unpleasantness should be controlled within a normal range. Gu Xingyun is selfish, Jiang Shangyu is ambitious, and Li Guangtu is too paranoid. To be honest, I don't like them, but their existence can make Tianlan more aware of his position. There are some things that you, me, Tianlan, and everyone can't touch. If you touch it, it will be subverting the system. What I want to do is to let Tianlan walk on the most right path. I can see through Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu. They may be thoughtful, but their purpose is too obvious. But I couldn't see through him. I didn't know what he wanted or what his future would be like. His mind was not simple, but chaotic. No one could say that Emperor Dong's palace could become what it was today because of Tianlan's painstaking efforts. He wanted to control everything, but it seemed that he did not have a strong desire for power. This wasn't a compliment, but a warning. I don't even know what he wants. How can I trust him? The most important thing is that Tianlan is still too young. His mind and his martial arts are all in the process of continuous growth, faster and faster. Xianxia state needed a heavenly son who could deter the whole world as an individual. Unless it was the last resort, Xianxia state would not give up on him. So I need people like Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu. It's also a kind of protection. The three of them are no match for Tianlan, so how can they defeat Emperor Dong's palace? But in the framework of Xianxia state, with their covetous eyes, Emperor Dong's palace will be more cautious. Crack! The lighter lit the cigarette. A misty mist floated in the living room. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and said flatly, "What I want is the balance of Xianxia state, a controllable situation. In this situation, everyone is controllable. You, me, every director, every member of parliament, every wealthy family, including Tianlan, can be controlled. That's the only thing I want. As for other things, power, wealth, and status, as long as Tianlan asks, I can give them. But if he wants Xianxia state, I can't give it to him." Dongqing Wudi continued to be silent. After a long time, he slowly nodded and said, "I see." Li Huaqing's words and deeds were consistent. Dongqing Wudi was very clear about this. If not, there would not have been a fundamental conflict between Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. Li Tianlan's 2 years in the desert prison were 2 years when the Southeast Group and the Giant Group were reshuffled, and also 2 years when they were strongly suppressed by the Academy and the Prince Group. But compared with Chen Fangqing and the Prince Group's relentless pursuit, the academics always hindered the Prince Group intentionally or unintentionally. Although it did not seem obvious, it was true that Li Huaqing was controlling some progress. Chen Fangqing wanted to eradicate the cancer of Xianxia state. But there was no cancer in Li Huaqing's eyes. What he wanted was a stable situation. For some forces that were so powerful that Xianxia state could not control, he would weaken them, but he would never choose to completely destroy them. In his eyes, a destroyed Wang family of Beihai was also a huge loss to Xianxia state. So Chen Fangqing could not bear it anymore and came up with the so-called termination plan. Now Li Huaqing treated Li Tianlan the same way. Emperor Dong's palace was now controllable, and it was completely under the control of Xianxia state. Emperor Dong's palace was very powerful, rich, with many masters and amazing potential. These were objective facts. But in front of Xianxia state, What was the current Emperor Dong's palace? Everything they had just started, and all their potential and even their financial resources had not been exchanged for real strength. If Xianxia state was determined to move against Emperor Dong's palace, from beginning to end, it might be just a matter of pressing a button. In a few minutes, everything in Emperor Dong's palace would disappear. Li Huaqing could not make such a decision, but he also saw the possibility that Emperor Dong's palace would be powerful beyond control. So he kept Gu Xingyun, supported Jiang Shangyu, and wanted to rescue Li Guangtu in order to create an opponent who could balance Li Tianlan. He could give Li Tianlan everything he wanted, but he would never allow Emperor Dong's palace to rise completely and control Xianxia state while breaking away from the control of Xianxia state. If it really came to this, it would no longer be a game. Instead, it was a battle to the death where blood flowed like rivers. This was what Li Huaqing tried his best to avoid. So he found Dongqing Wudi tonight. It was not a negotiation or a threat. It was full of sincerity and kindness. Shi Hanbing was transferred to the army headquarters. Bai Qingzhao was transferred from the army headquarters. This also meant that as long as Dongqing Wudi was willing, Bai Qingzhao would be the next commander of the Border Control Corps. There was no problem with Bai Qingzhao's qualifications. The only flaw might be his strength. Compared with Dongqing Wudi, who was at the top of the half-step invincible realm, Bai Qingzhao was only at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the Border Control Corps, he was far from the strongest. But because of his origin and Dongqing Wudi's relationship, these flaws were nothing at all. Bai Qingzhao was in this position now. Then 5 years later, as Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi retired, the possibility of Bai Qingzhao taking over Dongqing Wudi's current position would be infinitely close to 100%. This would undoubtedly allow the giant group to better protect the new group that had just risen. And because the giant group continued to be strong in the army headquarters, the academics would also become a firm ally of the giant group and even the new group in the next 5 years or even longer. This was not a condition for exchanging Li Guangtu. This was a signal. And as long as Li Tianlan accepted this signal, then everything else could be discussed. I will go to Tiannan as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi said in a steady voice. Have a good talk with Tianlan. Chapter 1198. Late at night, Dongqing Hongguang, who had fallen asleep, received a call from Dongqing Wudi. The old man was 80 years old. Although his martial arts foundation at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was still there, the aging of his body was inevitable. He had been living like a prince for many years and had gradually let go of his martial arts. His state began to decline more than a decade ago. As he grew older, his spirit began to deteriorate, so he generally went to bed early and got up early. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang. Usually, Dongqing Hongguang would get up and take a walk on the mountain in about an hour if there was no accident. The timing of Dongqing Wudi's call was subtle, which was enough to show the urgency of the matter. Turning on the chandelier in the bedroom, Dongqing Hongguang sat on the bed and shook his head hard. Outside the bedroom, there were rapid but light and not the slightest messy footsteps. As one of the few veterans of the older generation in Xianxia state, the minister of army headquarters more than 20 years ago, and the anchor of the giant group, Dongqing Hongguang's health was of great importance to everyone, not only his enemies but also his own people. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Dongqing Hongguang was still there, the giant group might be lonely, but it would never disappear. It was the same as the Li family back then. How earth-shattering was the case of treason. But Li Honghe could still leave Yuzhou with nearly 2,000 elites of the Li family and enter the border. It was not a complete retreat, but it also preserved the core strength that should be preserved. So when the light in Dongqing Hongguang's bedroom was turned on, the highly focused guard on duty had pressed the call button. The medical team that the parliament had assigned to Dongqing Hongguang rushed out with instruments and all kinds of drugs in line with Dongqing Hongguang's physical condition and stood at the door of Dongqing Hongguang's room. I'm fine. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head. When he saw the caller ID on the phone, he quickly sobered up. He held the phone, said something to the door, and then continued, "Go back and rest." There was a crisp and powerful voice outside the door, and the footsteps gradually faded away and finally disappeared. The phone call from Dongqing Wudi also stopped. Dongqing Hongguang thought about it and called Dongqing Wudi directly back. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. The roar of the helicopter's roar came faintly from the other end of the phone. Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly, and Dongqing Wudi's apologetic voice rang in his ears. "Dad, am I disturbing your rest?" "I'm fine." Dongqing Hongguang's voice was steady. "I'm old. I don't have much sleep. If I want to sleep, I'll have plenty of chances in the future." Before Dongqing Wudi could say anything, he smiled and asked directly, "What's the matter?" "The president just left my place." Dongqing Wudi did not hesitate to enter the whole body directly. The internal style of the Dongqing clan had always been straightforward. It was the standard military style, iron-blooded and direct, and what they disliked most was nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang narrowed his eyes and answered with confusion. "It's about Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little unclear in the roar of the helicopter's rotors, but every word reached Dongqing Hongguang's ears. Just yesterday, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun besieged Tianlan and suffered a crushing defeat. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun escaped with serious injuries. Li Guangtu was captured alive by Tianlan and brought back to Xianyuan City. The president is here for this matter. Dongqing Hongguang froze in place and did not speak for a while. He had a regular schedule and went to bed early. When the news that Li Tianlan had seriously injured the three masters and really established his invincible status spread throughout the dark world, Dongqing Hongguang had already fallen asleep. This was undoubtedly a very important piece of good news, but it was okay to know the good news later, so no one disturbed Dongqing Hongguang's sleep. Dongqing Hongguang himself did not expect that Li Tianlan would bring such a huge impact to him within a few minutes after waking up. After a long time, Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and smiled. He whispered softly, almost murmuring, with an imperceptible tremor. This piece of news came to his ears abruptly, driving away all his drowsiness. Thousands of words were constantly brewing in his heart. This day was too long. The past was vivid in his mind. Time was like a knife, and the pictures of the past were constantly flashing in his mind. That year, Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, left the mountain of the Dongqing clan with the newborn baby in his arms. Dongqing Hongguang stood on the top of the mountain, silently watching the old and the little figure get farther and farther away. In front of them was the spreading frost and snow. At that time, Dongqing Hongguang told himself that 20 years later, the child taken away would become the pillar of the giant group and even the whole Zhongzhou state. Invincible and invincible. More than 20 years. The Dongqing clan had been waiting for this day for too long. There were accidents, setbacks, pain, and uneasiness. But in the end, they got the result they wanted most. Dongqing Hongguang was in a daze. He did not know what to say for a while except for the word, good. The bedroom door was slowly pushed open. Uncle Fu, the old butler of the Dongqing clan, came in with a cup of tea, put it in front of Dongqing Hongguang, and quietly left. Dongqing Hongguang finally came to his senses and took a deep breath. The corners of his mouth curled up uncontrollably. His hand that was holding the phone kept trembling, but his voice was still steady as he hummed in agreement. "The president wants to get Li Guangtu back from Tianlan and hopes that we can communicate with Tianlan." "Communicate?" Dongqing Wudi whispered. "I'm on my way to the airport now, ready to fly straight to Dunnan." There was no airport in Tiannan at present. Flying straight to Tiannan obviously would not take a passenger plane. The sound of the helicopter was whistling. Dongqing Wudi obviously took a helicopter from the Hidden Dragon Sea to the nearest military airport and took a fighter jet straight to Xianyuan City. With the speed of the fighter jet and the speed of Dongqing Wudi's arrival at the airport, Dongqing Wudi could appear in Emperor Dong's palace within an hour. That's an expected attitude. Dongqing Hongguang said lightly, then frowned slightly. "You're in a hurry." Dongqing Wudi was silent, then smiled and said, At this time, he could naturally go to Xianyuan City to communicate with Li Tianlan, but such a hurry might stimulate Li Tianlan's reverse psychology. Of course, he had to go to Xianyuan City, but there was no need to be too anxious. The parliament was indeed worried about Li Guangtu's life, But if Li Tianlan really wanted to kill him, he would not have taken him back to Xianyuan City. You take a passenger plane to Nanyuan City and enter Xianyuan City from there. Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Dongqing Wudi hesitated and said with a smile, "Okay. What on earth did the academics promise Tianlan to make you so anxious?" Dongqing Hongguang smiled faintly. They relented about the border control corps. Dongqing Wudi said, "What else?" Dongqing Hongguang asked indifferently. The border control corps was indeed a problem, but if the Dongqing clan fought for it with all its might, there was at least a 70% chance of winning the position. The only variable was that some of the backbone forces at other levels of the border control corps might be transferred away, so as to weaken the Dongqing clan's influence on the border control corps. Li Huaqing mentioned the border control corps, but in fact, what he offered was not the position of a commander, but the position of a part of the backbone forces. These were naturally very tempting, but not enough. This was not like Li Huaqing's style. He was not so narrow-minded. He means to let Han Bing enter Yuzhou and let Qin Chao lead the border control corps. Dongqing Wudi continued. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and narrowed his eyes. He understood Li Huaqing's meaning immediately. Dongqing Hongguang slowly stood up, took a sip of tea, and suddenly said, "These are all for the giant group. What about Xianlun?" Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. Li Huaqing had made sure of this. But now no one dared to say that Emperor Dong's palace belonged to the giant group. Li Huaqing said that these were all benefits for the giant group, but what could he give Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then whispered the most important condition given by Li Huaqing, Beijiang. Chapter 1199. Li Huaqing offered the heaviest bargaining chip. No matter what other thoughts he had in his heart, or whether he would be very reluctant, in that kind of negotiation atmosphere, the bargaining chip he offered must be fully guaranteed to be fulfilled. Beijiang. This was what he planned to use to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace. The province of 1.7 million square kilometers was equivalent to 1/6 of the total area of Zhongzhou State. It was the largest province in Zhongzhou State and a province that had always been coordinated by Zhongzhou State councillors. This was an unparalleled temptation. It was also an unprecedented challenge. For Emperor Dong's palace, this was the case. The new group was rising in Zhongzhou State with incomparable vigor. Everyone inside and outside the game could see its increasingly clear outline. With Xianyuan City as the core and Xianxia as the foundation, the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace was slowly shrouding Dongshan, Jiangnan, Xie, and Nanyue. If Beijiang was added, the new group almost had a kind of power that was almost no less than that of the Southeast group. If Tiannan also became a part of Zhongzhou State in the future, with its special geographical location and source, Tiannan province would inevitably have an absolute position in the future. From another perspective, as long as Li Tianlan could keep his current territory, in 5 or 10 years, the new group would be a supergroup with 3 councillors in the worst case. The strength of the Southeast group lay in its 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Wuxia and Beijiang. As long as Emperor Dong's palace accepted Li Huaqing's conditions, they would have 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Nanyue and Beijiang. In the future, Tiannan would be added. In his current state, 10 years later, there was no need to use uncertain adjectives such as almost, probably, and perhaps. The new group would inevitably become the most powerful group in Zhongzhou State in 10 years. There was no doubt about this. Li Huaqing means who will go to Beijiang? Dongqing Hongguang's voice was a little low. Dongqing Wudi thought for a moment and said softly, "He didn't say." Dongqing Hongguang laughed, and his voice seemed to be mixed with sneer and emotion. Beijiang was in front of them. It was an opportunity, a temptation, and a problem. The most difficult thing was that the new group had no one. The new group had a lot of talents. Not to mention others, just in Xianxia, the team that Wu Jingmin had painstakingly brought out for more than 20 years was enough to support a large group in time. What was the situation of Xianxia in recent years? Since the Li family, Wu Jingmin had been firmly rooted here. They seemed to be a part of the Southeast group, but as the territory of the Li family, Xianxia faced the ubiquitous pressure from the Southeast group and the covetous eyes of other major groups. Everyone wanted to break up the last bit of the Li family's power and take Xianxia into their own hands. Xianxia had been very stable in the past 20 years, but it was also unstable. All kinds of transfers were carried out intermittently. Under such circumstances, it was a miracle that Wu Jingmin could stand firm in Xianxia. This was not his own miracle, but a miracle that belonged to the entire Xianxia. Those who were able to walk to the top and become Wu Jingmin's trusted aides were all true elites left behind by the great waves. There weren't many of them, but each of them could hold their own, be it in terms of ability or loyalty. They were all top-notch. With Wu Jingmin's entry into the cabinet and the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, Xianxia began to rise. Zhou Yuanshan entered Xianxia. Wang Jingxin left Lin. Dongqing Qiuqi followed closely. Xianxia had made all kinds of big moves in recent years. As the outline of the new group became more and more clear, the forces of the entire Xianxia began to break into the righteous altar of Zhongzhou state in a very aggressive manner. This was the greatest wealth that Li Honghe had left to Li Tianlan, and its significance was even greater than that of the veterans of the Li family standing beside Li Tianlan now. The new group was now in a clear but secretive structure. With this election, 6 of the 13 congressmen in Xianxia would take more important positions, including the governor of Nanyue, the speaker of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the speaker of Siye, the governor of Jiangnan, and so on. This was the full outbreak of the power of Xianxia after more than 20 years of accumulation. It was like the sun piercing the dark sky, symbolizing the rising sun of the new group. In another 5 years, with the current team of the new group, they might be able to win more key positions of congressmen. But they needed to stay there for 5 years. Judging from the current situation, no one in the new group had the qualifications to compete for the position of congressman, and no one had the qualifications to go to a key province like Beijiang. That was why there was the initial integration of the giant group and the new group. According to the normal development, the giant group would be integrated into the new group sooner or later. As the heavenly son from the Dongqing clan, the Bai family and the Zhou family in Yuzhou all fully approved of Li Tianlan inheriting all this. But it took time. It was necessary to complete many exploratory integration in the elections again and again to ensure that there was no too much turbulence and backlash within the giant group. Otherwise, Emperor Dong's palace would not absorb help. It would be constant trouble and internal instability. Now in this election, only 5 people, or 4, had been confirmed to join the new group from the giant group. The first one was by Xianxia. She was undoubtedly qualified to go to Beijiang. As an extraordinary woman in the altar of Zhongzhou state, although Bai Xianxia was a woman, she could be called one of the most powerful chairmen in Zhongzhou state. It was not the kind of unreasonable oppression. In the working state, Bai Xianxia had a sharp and clear mind, a strong sense of the overall situation, a good sense of advance and retreat, aggressive sharpness, and steady as a rock. In the eyes of the outside world, Bai Xianxia joining the new group was definitely a good move. If she continued to stay in the giant group, the position of congressman might be her end. But now, after joining the new group, with the strong rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Bai Xianxia might very well become the second female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state. History always repeated itself. The first female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state came from the Wang family of Beihai, which was the period when the Wang family of Beihai quickly reached its peak. Now, with Emperor Dong's palace constantly sprinting toward the peak, who could be sure that Bai Xianxia could not reach this level? After Bai Xianxia, the second confirmed to join the new group from the giant group was Cheng Huaining, the highest commander of the European garrison. After the election, he would be transferred back to Yuzhou and become the spokesperson of the new group in the army headquarters. The third and fourth were the husband and wife, Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi. Zhou Yuanshan was the absolute core flag task of the giant group after 20 years. His joining the new group represented the decision of the integration of the giant group and the new group. Now Zhou Yuanshan was the governor of Nanyue. The giant group and the new group were trying their best to push him to the position of Speaker of Nanyue in the election. Nanyue's economy was extremely developed. Although it was occasionally overtaken by Wuyue inexplicably, Nanyue was the only place that was qualified to compete with Wuxia for the position of the first province in Zhongzhou State. Almost all the speakers were congressmen. Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old, was undoubtedly not qualified to be a member of parliament. The direction of the giant group and the new group's efforts was to push Zhou Yuanshan into the parliament and serve as an honorary member of parliament. Another name for honorary member of parliament was alternate member of parliament. It had a certain power of a member of parliament. It could participate in the meeting of the parliament and had the right to speak, but it had no right to vote. But as long as he could enter the parliament, express his views, and have ideological confrontation with the giants, it was enough for Zhou Yuanshan. The honorary member of parliament could barely stay in Nanyue, so the two groups were now sparing no effort to promote Zhou Yuanshan. Similarly, Zhou Yuanshan was also a candidate who could barely go to Beijiang. But no one would be willing to give up Nanyue and choose Beijiang. The bargaining chip offered by Li Huaqing was indeed tempting enough, but it was also like a dilemma. Because the new group could not push out a candidate who could go to Beijiang to serve as the speaker for the time being. The giant group had such a candidate, but it was already their plan to let 4 people join the new group. At this time, if they let a member of parliament enter the new group, there would inevitably be turbulence inside the giant group. Now the best choice seemed to be to let Bai Qingqian give up the position of deputy prime minister and go to Beijiang. After all, Li Huaqing still agreed with some of Qin Fangqing's ideas. He also did not want to see the emergence of a new group that was too strong in the cabinet. But his approach was relatively mild, which was equivalent to exchanging the largest province of Zhongzhou State for a position in the cabinet. This is a good bargaining chip. Dongqing Hongguang said faintly, "It's just a complete exchange, an exchange of duties. In fact, we even suffer a loss." That's it. Does he still want to exchange for Li Kuangtu? Does he want to get something for nothing? Tianlan won't agree. Dongqing Wudi laughed. Then why are you still going to Xinyuan City? Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows. I'm in a hurry now because I'm waiting for Li Huaqing's new bargaining chip. In addition, I want you to give me some advice. Maybe we should take the initiative and make some requests. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth moved, and he fell silent. Dongqing Wudi smiled, with a touch of high enthusiasm and excitement in his voice. Tonight, before Li Huaqing came to me, many people contacted me. Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows slightly. Star State Army Department, Men in Black, German Army Department, England Army Department, France, Kunlun City. All kinds of forces, there are about 20. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. Dongqing Hongguang froze for a moment, and then laughed. That thing, is it settled? It's been brewing for a few months, and now the time is ripe. I signed my name on the document, and the result is as we expected. Dongqing Wudi laughed and said, maybe at this time, the news has begun to explode in the dark world. He held his mobile phone, looked out of the window at the deep night, and whispered, Old Master, our time has really come. Chapter 1200. The busy crowd began to disappear. All kinds of instruments were turned off one by one. In the secret room that gradually quieted down, the mechanical clock on the wall ticked. Jiang Shangyu looked at the communication that had been hung up and turned to look at Gu Xingyun. In 3 hours, we'll go back to China. Ha, Gu Xingyun sneered, but there was an extremely weak look in his eyes. His breakthrough was smoother than he had imagined. In just a few days, he went from close to the peak of the invincible realm to the top of the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of physical fitness alone, his physical fitness had exceeded the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. Such a huge and explosive progress could be said to be a meteoric rise. In this state, Gu Xingyun was sure that he could easily beat 3 or 5 of himself before the breakthrough. He thought he was standing at the peak of the dark world. This feeling didn't change even after he lost to Li Tianlan. There was only one person who was truly invincible in the world. But others also had the power to stand at the peak. Whether Li Tianlan was there or not, Gu Xingyun felt that he was standing at the top of the dark world. His body had crossed the uncrossable boundary. As long as he was given time, in 3 or 5 years, He was confident that he could completely improve his realm and reach the level of Li Kuangtu. He thought that in this way he could lead Kunlun City to continue to take root in Zhongzhou State. Maybe he would face the oppression of Emperor Dong's palace, but with allies like Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu, his future would never be desperate and gloomy. But now, he did have the power to stand at the peak of the dark world. But other than that, he had nothing. What else can I do when I go back to China? Gu Xingyun said lightly. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him. Your mentality will make me lose my confidence in you. The current situation is really bad, but it's not unacceptable. We still have a chance and our cooperation. It's your cooperation with Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun said in a cold voice. Does Kunlun City have the capital to cooperate with you now? What does your cooperation with Zhongzhou State have to do with me? Do you think it's a betrayal? Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. Does it matter? Gu Xingyun said with a faint smile. Of course it is important. Jiang Shangyu nodded. You are our ally, and Kunlun City is a very important part of our strength. As I said at the beginning, it will be beneficial for both of us if we cooperate. He paused for a moment, then laughed again. And besides standing on my side, do you have any other choice? It looks like it, but it's only looks. You can reject everything we talked about today and leave Zhongzhou State angrily. For Zhongzhou State, this is a betrayal. Li Huaqing's thunderous fury is not something you can handle. Because, at your position once you leave Zhongzhou State, you will violate the bottom line of Zhongzhou State. No matter how stiff the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan is, in this case, he will let Li Tianlan clean up the mess. Without our allies, you are no match for Li Tianlan now. Or, are you going to seek refuge with Li Tianlan? Just like hundreds of years ago, when you turned to the Lin clan and then wagged your tail beside the original Li family? Jiang Shangyu smiled brightly. Let's not talk about dignity. You and I both know that dignity is not important in the face of survival. But do you really think Li Tianlan can accept your surrender? It's impossible. You know that. Li Tianlan can't tolerate you. He wants to annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Many people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital can't tolerate you, and the elders of the Li family who stay with Li Tianlan can't tolerate you either. So you can't join Emperor Dong's palace. Even if Li Tianlan temporarily takes you in, you are just a dog at his feet, even worse than a dog. You can only be cannon fodder to deal with us. When he uses you to clean us up, guess who will be the next one to die? Gu Xingyun listened with no expression. Jiang Shangyu rubbed his brand new arm. This was the real arm that he made for himself with his authority before the real environment blocked the world. Feeling his arm becoming more and more flexible, he said in a flat voice, "Only we are your best allies and your best choice. What I can be sure of is that Li Tianlan's state when he fought with us was a little special. Under normal circumstances, we are indeed no match for him, but there shouldn't be such a big gap between us. I'm not talking about whether we can catch up to his strength, but at the very least, his strength is within our understanding. In this kind of environment, if we attack him again, the result will definitely be different. You said it yourself." Gu Xingyun said coldly, "Only for now. The present is the present, and also the future." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "I think Li Tianlan has reached the peak state he can reach, at least infinitely close. In the future, Li Tianlan may make further progress, but it will not be too obvious. What is certain is that it is impossible for him to make a huge breakthrough in combat capability and reach the level of Wang Tianzong and Mormons. This is impossible." Gu Xingyun raised his head and looked at Jiang Shangyu seriously. Jiang Shangyu did not explain anything. Unknown had completely fallen. This was something he confirmed from absorbing Unknown's memories. The real environment had completely sealed off the Miracle City. It was theoretically possible for Li Tianlan to break through the blockade of the real environment by himself. But it was only in theory. If he wanted to break through the blockade of the real environment, Li Tianlan needed the real brand. But his true imprint was not complete. Li Tianlan's real brand and a wisp of his soul were deep in Qin Weibai's real brand. This was the key to Huang Shi to protect Qin Weibai and not let her die completely. But now it became the key to blocking Li Tianlan's room for progress. Because the real Qin Weibai had already died in the Eternal Sword. This also meant that Li Tianlan had no possibility to break through the blockade of the real environment. After his combat capability reached a certain level, because his soul and real brand were not complete, he would never make any progress in his life. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth and said, "We don't have nothing now. We just take a step back for the time being. I still have a trump card in my hand." He looked at Gu Xingyun and whispered with a smile, "After going back, find a suitable opportunity, maybe I can play this card. Enjoy the look of making Li Tianlan collapse. How about it? Are you looking forward to it?" Chapter 1201. In the deep and obscure night, the fighter plane that took off from Yuzhou landed at a base in Nanyuan. Dongqing Wudi, who didn't waste any time along the way, walked alone on the prepared helicopter. In the roar of the rotors, the night of Nanyuan was receding, and the brilliant lights of Shenyuan City were getting closer and closer. Jiang Shangyu left the Secret Research Institute in South America. He and Gu Xingyun were going to a small city 200 kilometers away, then take a train across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness to another city, and then take a plane back to Zhongzhou State. The ground of America had been shaking slightly. The huge earthquake with continuous aftershocks was spreading to the entire American land plate, and there were whales everywhere. If the railway was destroyed, the train was naturally useless. Jiang Shangyu had begun to consider the route from South America to North America and then to Zhongzhou State. After a sleepless night, Li Huaqing returned to his office in the Hidden Dragon Sea and made a cup of strong tea by himself. Exhaustion hit his body and mind like a tide, but his brain was not sleepy at all. He looked at the clock on the wall, calculated the time after Dongqing Wudi arrived in Tiannan, and waited quietly for the news. Guo Wenyan, the only leader of the Prince Group, had left the Hidden Dragon Sea after hanging up the communication with Jiang Shangyu a few hours ago. His current whereabouts were unknown, but it was clear that the Prince Group was now ready to welcome the new situation. Tiannan, Heaven Capital. The governor of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword energy that pervaded heaven and earth surged under the night sky. Daybreak, dawn, phoenix, countless masters and elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were still trapped in the headquarters. The sword energy blockade left by Li Tianlan didn't weaken at all. Standing in the center of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and looking at the night sky, colorful sword lights flashed from time to time between heaven and earth, with sharpness and killing, trapping all the forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that wanted to go out. No one could break through the sword energy left by Li Tianlan here. Including Daybreak, another invincible realm expert in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The surging sword energy swept the whole city. Daybreak once wanted to break through by force, but under the blockade of the sword energy, he could barely take 3 steps and had to retreat with serious injuries. No one could leave. But the news was still being passed on. Everyone already knew the cooperation between Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. They also knew that Li Guangtu was now captured by Li Tianlan. The atmosphere inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital became depressing and gloomy, and even a little dull. Snow Country. Wang Xiaoyao, who had returned with serious injuries after the battle in North Sea, locked himself in the dark hall and looked at a lit LCD screen in the center of the hall. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. On the stage, a formidable person in North Sea, Wang Shengxiao, who was wearing a coat of sword energy, looked at the vast sea in the distance without saying a word. Wang Tianzong's sword energy stood beside him as if he seemed to be waiting for something quietly. The news that the 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan caused a stir in the dark world. But the dark world quickly fell silent again. Amidst the extreme pressure, every force and every person seemed to be waiting for something. Everyone knew what they were waiting for. The suffocating feeling was suffocating. At 4:50 in the morning, Zhongzhou State time. Dongqing Wudi had just arrived in Shenyuan City. The news that everyone had been waiting for swept through the entire dark world at the speed of a hurricane, exploding everyone's thoughts. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong Palace, Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, European Alliance, Shadow Throne, Snow Country Military Department, Sanctuary, Rothschild, Dark Knights. Star State, Men in Black, Army Headquarters, Fantasy World, Heroes Club. Burning Legion, Mercenaries on Fire, Death's Embrace, Shadow Blade, Flame Chariot, one country after another. One force after another formed the current Dark World. That night, all the forces in the Dark World jointly released a new message. This was undoubtedly an extremely rare thing. But to a certain extent, this wasn't a rare occurrence. Because the Dark World had experienced many times in the past decades and centuries. It had been 5 years since all the major forces released the news together. Everyone knew very well that there was only one thing that could make all the countries and the major forces release the news together. This news might not be absolutely accurate, but it was also absolutely authoritative. It was a list that fully demonstrated the comparison of the peak power of each country and the major superpowers. To be more precise, it was the New World Divine List ranking. It included dozens of countries, all the superpowers, hundreds of second-class large forces, countless mercenary groups, and a large number of killer organizations. It included the entire Dark World. After a series of games, it was recognized by all the forces and announced to the World Divine List ranking. Everyone was paying close attention to the list. On the short list, everyone could see the power of Xianxia state completely rising in the Dark World. The 15th place on the World Divine List, the last place. The former commander of the Border Control Corps, the youngest marshal of the army headquarters of Xianxia State, the disciple of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, Dijiang. Although Dijiang, who had been defeated by Li Tianlan, had been imprisoned in Beihai for the past 2 years, it was obvious that the Dark World had not forgotten him. This list had been recognized by the Wang family of Beihai. In a sense, it seemed to indicate that Wang Xingshiao had plans to restart Dijiang in the near future. The 14th place on the World Divine List. 2 people tied. The Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's Palace, the former number 1 of Samsara Palace. Heavenly King, Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, St. Wei Kunlun. Daybreak, the Lord of Sanluo Temple in Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The 2 broke through to the Invincible Realm at roughly the same time. Although they had not fought many times in the past few years and it was difficult to compare, their specific realms were roughly the same. They both barely stabilized their invincible realm strength and were good at using swords. There was some other meaning in putting these 2 people together on the 14th place on the World Divine List. The 13th place on the World Divine List was also tied with 2 people. The Deputy Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's Palace, the Governor of Sai City in Xianxia State, Sidutangyue, the Hidden God of Xianxia State. Ramelun, the Commander of the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion had taken root in Tianan so far. It could be said that it was the strongest force in Tianan except for Emperor Dong's Palace. Ramelun, the Commander of the Burning Legion, and Situ Tsangyue were both experts who were close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. All the major forces recognized this ranking. If the parties involved did not recognize the tie, they could push down those who were as famous as themselves. The 12th place on the World Divine List. Afar, the Chief of the Dark Knights. Afar's injury had not healed since the chaos in Snow Country, but he had recovered his combat capability. His strength was also recognized as slightly stronger than that of Situ Tsangyue and the others. The 11th place on the World Divine List. Moraid, the former deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps in the Sanctuary and the chief of the Knights Templars. As an expert who was closest to the peak of the Invincible Realm, his strength was obviously stronger than the last few. Everyone recognized his ranking. The 10th place on the World Divine List. Paul, the current Patriarch of Rothschild. The current Patriarch of Rothschild, who was seriously injured after taking action once in the chaos of Snow Empire, seemed to be somewhat tragic, but his personal strength was beyond doubt. 9th on the World Divine List. Dark Knights Guild, Dark Queen Moongaze. There was no doubt that in the few years after the death of the Master of Samsara Palace, Mochizuki Song, who had supported the Dark Knights alone, had become the most legendary female expert in the Dark World. 8th place on the World Divine List. Wang Xiaoyao from the Wang family of Beihai. His ranking was ahead of Moongaze and Song, which was the result witnessed by the entire Dark World in the final battle of Beihai. 7th place on the World Divine List. Li Shi, the wife of the former governor of Kunlun City and the current deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. No adjectives were needed to prove his achievements. Everyone could see one fact clearly. That was Li Shi's strength. The peak of the invincible realm. To be exact, it started from Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List. The weakest of the top 8 on the World Divine List was at the peak of the invincible realm. This was a lineup that had never been seen on the World Divine List in the past hundreds of years. It signified an unprecedented amount of gold. It also meant that an incomparably grand era had completely descended. Chapter 1202. If Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List, had not clearly made the Dark World feel anything, then the appearance of Li Shi, the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, who ranked 7th, had completely made the Dark World realize that this year's World Divine List was incredibly valuable. Wang Xiaoyao was also at the peak of the invincible realm. It was just that he had hidden his strength for too long. Now that the news had spread, it gave people a feeling that he was very strong but also a little weak. But Li Shi was totally different. Before she officially became the deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, most people in the Dark World did not even know who Li Shi was. Only a few superpowers upper echelons understood the power behind this name. As the center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State in the past 2 decades, the names of Kunlun City and Zhongzhou State's war god Gu Xingyun could be said to be famous in the Dark World. But those super forces all knew very well that the person with the highest realm and the strongest combat capability in Kunlun City was not Gu Xingyun. It was Li Shi, the wife of the city governor of Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Li Shi was already at the real peak of the invincible realm. Now, Li Shi, who had been at the peak of the invincible realm for many years, announced to the whole Dark World that she had officially set foot in the Dark World after becoming the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. All the countries and forces in the world ranked her 7th. My ranking is low? Or was it too valuable? Gu Xingyun could be said to be a frequent visitor to the World Divine List in the past 20 years. The ranking of the Divine List took place once every 5 years. Gu Xingyun had been on the list for the past 4 times, from the initial 9th place all the way up. 10 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 4th on the Divine List. 5 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 5th on the Divine List. 4th or 5th. At that time, Gu Xingyun was not at the peak of the invincible realm. In the past few decades, the Dark World's impression of the peak of the invincible realm was that it was powerful, the peak, and irresistible. This realm represented the true upper limit of an individual's combat ability. It represented the top 5 or even the top 3 on the Divine List. This was a combat power that could affect a superpower or superpower. Now, Wang Xiaoyao, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 8th. Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 7th. The peak of the invincible realm, which once represented the top of the Divine List, could only be ranked in the middle this time. The whole Dark World was shaking. Everyone knew that this might be the most terrifying Divine List ranking in the Dark World in hundreds of years. It looks like the whole thing is. The withering Dark World was changing. After the major forces withdrew from the stage, there was less chaos, but more cruelty. What kind of world-shaking figure would be able to ascend to the top of the Divine List, which was filled with so much value? After Li Shi, 6th place on the World Divine List. Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Kunlun City. His breakthrough had been confirmed by the Dark World, and the news that the 3 experts besieged Donghuang had also spread throughout the Dark World. As a newly advanced expert at the peak of the invincible realm, under normal circumstances, he should rank behind Li Shi and even behind Wang Xiaoyao. However, in the end, Gu Xingyun was still ranked 6th in the rankings that all the major forces agreed upon. The reason? The reason was that Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Kuangtu besieged Li Tianlan together. Although Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, he did not die. This was the only reason, and it was also the reason that all the major countries and forces recognized it. Just because he did not die after besieging Li Tianlan, he was ranked ahead of Li Shi and Wang Xiaoyao. The top 5 of the World Divine List, which had always represented the peak of the Dark World's combat power, had already been changed. 5th place on the World Divine List. First Commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was a ranking that was subject to a lot of controversy but was finally pushed out reluctantly. In fact, in the previous Divine List, the 2nd to the 4th would be a little controversial. But since it could be finally determined, it represented the recognition of the whole Dark World. The absolute genius of the Li family in the past, the deity who could once compete with the Sword Emperor, was ranked 5th on the Divine List. This had something to do with him being captured by Li Tianlan. But in any case, within 5 years, unless Li Kuangtu could kill the people ahead of him, this ranking would be unshakable. 4th place on the World Divine List. There was no title, and there was even little introduction. It was just a name. Jiang Shangyu. Under the information of the Divine List, almost everyone listed a lot of battle records. Jiang Shangyu's battle records were the least described, but his battles were the most dangerous. He had fought against Li Tianlan 3 times. His combat capabilities surpassed the peak of the Invincible Realm. Everyone felt that he deserved the 4th place on the World Divine List. The top 3 of the World Divine List were the peak of the peak. Every name was so dazzling. 3rd place on the World Divine List. Former patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who rarely fought and was even in a state of seclusion, would fight. His record of fighting was more than Jiang Shangyu's. He was a super veteran expert who had been in the Dark World for decades. As the Lin clan's activities in the Dark World became more and more intense, their former patriarch was finally pushed to the 3rd place on the World Divine List. 2nd place on the World Divine List. Wang Shengxiao, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. This was a ranking that made the Dark World feel emotional, but they had to admit that it was not a wrong ranking. The 2nd place on the World Divine List could be said to be a person, or a ray of sword energy. He was Wang Shengxiao. But to some extent, it was the sword energy of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong that pushed Wang Shengxiao to the 2nd place on the Divine List. Perhaps many people would not be convinced by Wang Shengxiao, but who in the Dark World could say no to Wang Tianzong's sword energy? The sword energy was added to Wang Shengxiao. Under the 6 paths of reincarnation, Wang Shengxiao's combat capability would be infinitely close to Wang Tianzong's in the period of Mormons. It was completely natural for him to be ranked 2nd on the Divine List. The 1st place on the Divine List meant that he was absolutely invincible in today's Dark World. There could be no dispute. It seemed that people had begun to discuss it a few years ago. Until now, it was recognized by all the superpowers, and countless forces in the Dark World. Li Tianlan had a name that was recognized by the whole world. Donghuang. The 1st place on the Divine List, the Palace Master of Eastern Palace, Li Tianlan. There was no doubt, no argument, no challenge. Challenge? A day ago, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th on the Divine List had already jointly challenged. They were seriously injured and defeated. A little further away, the 2nd place on the Divine List also challenged Li Tianlan and was also defeated. Further away, Moraid, Ramiro, Paul, Wang Xiao, they had confirmed the look in their eyes. They were all people who had been taught a lesson by Li Tianlan. The Divine List of the world was shining brightly in the Dark World. It was boiling, restless, and spreading. That year, Li Tianlan was about to be 23 years old. He stood at the highest point of the world's martial arts and looked back at the top of the Divine List. Behind him were 14 so-called big shots who were equally famous in the Dark World. That year, Li Tianlan had not really touched the end of martial arts. But in the current Dark World, he was already the Real Supreme. So in his eyes, the so-called World Divine List. 14 experts in the invincible realm or beyond the invincible realm. Except for a few friends. The rest were non-entities. Chapter 1203. The sky above Yuzhou City turned bright. In the spacious and luxurious office of the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing stared at the computer desktop in front of him and was silent for a long time. He did not expect that he, who had been waiting for the news that Dongqing Wudi brought about the compromise between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan, would wait for the new ranking on the Divine List. The ranking of the Divine List was a major event in the Dark World. It could even be said to be the top priority. 15 people on the Divine List. It could be said that the various superpowers flaunted their military might every year. The ranking was held once every 5 years, and each ranking took about 3 months to sort out and communicate. Li Huaqing knew about the Divine List. This started a few months ago. At that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison. The ranking, especially the top ranking, was highly controversial. In the beginning, the European alliance ranked Lin Fengting first. East Island and Star State thought that Li Guangtu should be ranked first. Zhongzhou State recognized Wang Tianzong, who had disappeared in the Dark World but did not die. Of course, someone mentioned Li Tianlan. But at that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison and had not entered the invincible realm. No one thought he was the first. However, after several discussions, people had tacitly agreed that Li Tianlan would occupy a place in the top 5 of the Divine List. But the next few months were turbulent. After leaving the desert prison, Li Tianlan could be said to have soared to the sky. He was like the blazing sun of this era, hanging in the sky of the Dark World, illuminating everything with a light that would never fall. Li Huaqing quietly looked at the list in front of him. The news of the ranking of the Divine List swept across the world like a hurricane in the Dark World. The first to upload the list was the dark side of the world. Everyone who truly integrated into the Dark World knew the dark side of the world. This was not a faction. Instead, it was a website that people in the industry understood but outsiders could not enter no matter what. This was the largest network platform in the Dark World. All the words could be translated into the languages of various countries. Any major event in the Dark World would appear on the website as soon as possible. The dark side of the world had appeared in the Dark World for hundreds of years. Every time the Divine List ranking was released, it would be released first. The Divine ranking released by the dark side of the world represented absolute authority. It was tantamount to an official announcement. This was a dark forum where countless people were active every day. On the homepage, there were a lot of clear and concise but rich titles, radiating to every corner of the Dark World, involving a series of secret transactions such as war employment, time-limited assassinations, arms trade, intelligence trafficking, and so on. The Dark World was in turmoil every day, and at least 60% of the transactions were conducted through the dark side of the world. The Dark Forum, originally established by the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild, had lasted for hundreds of years. Today, all the superpowers in the world, including Zhongzhou State, had a certain proportion of shares in the dark side of the world. It was no exaggeration to say that this was the official forum of the Dark World. The post on the forum regarding the New World Divine List ranking had been pinned in red. It had been stuck for 5 years, and it would only be removed when the next Divine List ranking was announced. Li Huaqing silently opened the pinned post. An incomparably gorgeous list of names appeared in front of him. It was pure black with a hint of hazy scarlet. From Li Tianlan, who ranked first, to Dijiang, who ranked last. In the background of the list, there were countless seals and different styles. And the signatures of all the major countries. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City, Star State, Snow Country, the overall seal of the European Alliance, the seals of various European countries, the Shadow Throne, the Wang family of Beihai, Rothschild, the Dark Knights. The seals of all the forces were scattered in various places of the list as the background, providing absolute authority for the list. On the list, 15 golden names were arranged one by one, representing the highest majesty of the Dark World. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's name at the top of the list, his eyes twinkling. The Divine List was a feast of the Dark World, the ultimate force that all the major countries and forces showed off to the outside world. The Dark World had never been peaceful. On the dark web, there were tens of thousands of agents and spies from all countries lurking every day. Countless killers and mercenaries accumulated their wealth in blood and sin. The games and calculations of all countries had never stopped. There were many things in the dark world that everyone had to fight for, but there were also many things that could be solved through negotiation. The ranking of the Divine List represented absolute deterrence in a certain sense. Li Tianlan's ranking on the Divine List would undoubtedly give Xianxia State a great initiative in the next international game. This was the role that a top expert could play for a country. From another perspective, the more Li Tianlan could bring to Xianxia State, the more confidence he had to ask for his own treatment. This was a very fair thing. That was to say, with the announcement of the Divine List ranking and Li Tianlan's ranking on the top, Li Tianlan had another bargaining chip in his hand for many things in the future. The relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Xianxia State was too subtle. The 2 years in the desert prison was Xianxia State's suppression of him. The shuffling of the giant group and the southeast group was also a suppression of him. The storm caused by Chen Fangqing's death also exposed the idea of Xianxia State's intention to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. Although this was just an idea that had not been implemented, the reason why it was not implemented had nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace. And Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Gu Xingyun and suppressing the treason case that year, which to some extent touched the bottom line of Li Tianlan and the entire Li family. Li Huaqing said that he would give Li Tianlan an explanation. But the so-called explanation had not been seen yet, and Li Huaqing intended to forcibly rescue Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan. What would happen to Li Guangtu in Li Tianlan's hands? There would be many possibilities. Maybe Li Guangtu would be imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace for the rest of his life. Maybe Li Guangtu would desperately fight with Li Tianlan and eventually die in Li Tianlan's hands. Maybe Li Guangtu would let go of the knot in his heart and accept Li Tianlan's position as the leader of the Li family. Maybe there were many possibilities. But what would happen if Xianxia State rescued Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan's hands? There was only one result. Xianxia State's attitude was almost to support Li Guangtu, to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace go tit for tat, even kill each other. Li Huaqing could say that he wanted to balance, talk about the future, talk about the overall situation. Whatever he said was good, dignified, or from the bottom of his heart. In any case, this was his position. From the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, Xianxia State's move was to let the Li family kill each other to maintain their so-called balance. This was the overall situation in Li Huaqing's eyes. How could Li Tianlan accept it? If suppressing the treason case had made the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan drop to the freezing point, then Li Huaqing's intention to take Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan was tantamount to crossing Li Tianlan's bottom line. So even if Li Huaqing was the president, in the face of this situation, he had many concerns. He didn't even communicate with Li Tianlan in person. Instead, he asked Dongqing Wudi to go to Shenyuan City. But was this safe? Li Huaqing's eyes began to wander on the Divine List again. This year's Divine List had changed dramatically. Among them, there were some familiar figures. For example, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, Sititang Yue, and Lin Fengting, who had never been on the Divine List before but knew the Dark World very well. 15 people on the Divine List, 17 in the Invincible Realm, and most of them were newcomers. Wang Shengxiao, Jiang Shangyu, Wang Xiaoyao, Wang Wexiangu. These names fiercely impacted the psychological defense line of everyone in the Dark World. Especially Li Tianlan, who was on the top of the list, made everyone feel unbelievable and at the same time sincerely convinced. This list was full of the old and the new. This was because the name list of the two intersecting eras had officially begun to reveal the era of Donghuang. Donghuang was 23 years old. Li Huaqing could find countless reasons why Li Tianlan did not dare to fall out with Xianxia State. But he could also find several reasons why Li Tianlan dared to fall out with him. At 23 years old, he was invincible in the world. At this age, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too surprising. In the cold morning temperature, Li Huaqing took a light breath. Li Tianlan's ranking first on the divine list would bring great benefits to Zhongzhou state. But the premise was that Li Tianlan still belonged to Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing had never thought of expelling Li Tianlan from Zhongzhou state. But in the current situation, if he wanted to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace, he had to pay more. During the period when the divine list was announced and caused a sensation, if Li Tianlan was forced out of Zhongzhou state because of Li Guangtu, then Zhongzhou state would become the laughingstock of the dark world for at least a few decades in the future. And Li Tianlan, who was forced out of Zhongzhou state, would also become a nightmare that made Zhongzhou state breathless in the next few decades. This was the most unacceptable situation for Li Huaqing. Not to mention how many irresistible disasters Li Tianlan would bring to Zhongzhou state in such a situation. If Li Tianlan was really not in Zhongzhou state, there was no doubt that Jiang Shangyu and even Gu Xingyun, who were more ambitious, would be out of control. In such a sensitive situation, facing several top experts in the dark world, even Li Huaqing had to carefully control them. They were undoubtedly godly weapons that could shock the world, but if one did not control the godly weapons well, they would be the first to be decapitated. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here. Li Guangtu wanted to save him. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun also had to stay. This was Li Huaqing's bottom line. Once the balance formed by these people was out of control, it might be the beginning of the decline of Zhongzhou state's national power. The delicate relationship between Zhongzhou state and Emperor Dong's palace was no secret now. This was something that could not be hidden at all. With the announcement of the divine list, there must have been a lot of people secretly ready to take action, ready to find a suitable time to extend an olive branch to Li Tianlan. What should Li Huaqing do? In the long silence, Li Huaqing stood up from the smoky office. Do what you should do. That was his answer. He walked out of the office. Ma Si, who had already gone to work and was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Li Huaqing did not give Ma Si a chance to speak. He waved his hand and ordered in a low voice, "Get ready. We'll go to Tianan now." Chapter 1204. Light was the purest color. The faintly discernible light shone in wisps, dancing in the bedroom as if it were alive. It spread, decomposed, and finally turned into tiny imperceptible light particles. The light particles touched the ubiquitous sword energy around them. Li Tianlan could clearly feel the faint vitality contained in the light particles. Xianyuan Wushang stood beside him. The light radiated from his palm. His face was flushed with anger, embarrassment, and a hint of embarrassment. The light particles slowly integrated into Li Guangtu's body, who was in a coma. Li Guangtu's aura gradually stabilized at a very slow speed, and then began to strengthen little by little. There was no medicine, no equipment, and no assistance. Xianyuan Wushang stood in front of Li Guangtu, and there was only the pure light constantly radiating from his palm. Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly, slightly narrowing his eyes. Xianyuan Wushang had saved people twice. The first time was to save Wang Yue Xianxia, and the second time was to save Xiao Mahai, the majordomo of Emperor Dong's palace. But this was the first time Li Tianlan saw him make a move. Saint, who was lucky enough to see Xianyuan Wushang's treatment process, had roughly described the scene at that time and accurately summarized it in 8 words. The holy light was wanton and surging. Xianyuan Wushang was a doctor. But it was definitely not a conventional way for him to save people. The light rippled, and it could even be said to be a special ability. Li Tianlan didn't know whether there was such a thing as a special ability in this world. The wisps of light that bloomed from Xianyuan Wushang's hand were barely within his understanding. If he thought about it carefully, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state in his body seemed to have a similar effect as the light in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. They were both pure and rich vitality. But the dragon vein could only work on him. And Xianyuan Wushang had mastered this vitality. Therefore, he could be said to be the most brilliant doctor in this era. But the holy light was overflowing and surging. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the dim light particles in the air that seemed to disappear at any time. The light particles barely formed light spots when they gathered, and then quickly dimmed. No matter how low the standard was, the scene in front of him didn't seem to be surging. Li Tianlan watched Xianyuan Wushang toss and turn with an embarrassed face for nearly half an hour. Li Guangtu's aura was indeed increasing. However, he was still in a comatose state. This was completely different from what the saint had reported. Ji Song of the Healing Moon, 40 seconds. It took less than half a minute to heal Xiao Mahai. The treatment for Li Guangtu had been going on for 30 minutes, but it still didn't seem to be working. Li Tianlan knew about Li Guangtu's injury. Strictly speaking, his injury was much more serious than Xiao Mahai's and Mochizuki's at that time, but Li Guangtu's physical strength was also far stronger than Mochizuki's and Xiao Mahai's. After all, Li Tianlan didn't want to kill Li Guangtu. When he made a move, he didn't go too far and even took into account the internal injury of Li Guangtu. Jiang Shangyu obviously knew this, so he had no choice but to let Li Guangtu stay. If it were him or Gu Xingyun instead of Li Guangtu, the moment Li Tianlan made a move, one of them would definitely die. Therefore, if they were in the same physical strength, there was no reason for Li Guangtu's injury to be more serious than Xiao Mahai's. Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly said calmly, "Just heal him. It doesn't matter even if you let him return to his peak state. Don't worry about anything." His voice was very light, but it contained extreme calmness and confidence. Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched, and he became more and more embarrassed. Of course, he knew that he didn't have to worry about anything. Even if he did, it was not Li Guangtu. With Li Tianlan's current level, even if Li Guangtu was in his peak state, what threat could he pose? But in fact, although he was a little embarrassed to say it, he twitched the corner of his mouth and finally said, "I've tried my best." Yes, this was a situation that even Xianyuan Wushang himself didn't expect. He had tried his best, but it still ended up like this. He knew that the real environment had resealed the earth, and he could feel it, but he didn't expect that it would be sealed to this extent. Compared with before the seal, the strength of the real environment now was more than 100 times stronger. This directly led to a crazy decline in Xianyuan Wushang's healing ability. Now he could still be said to be the top doctor, and even could be said to be the best, but it was difficult for him to create miracles. In the real environment, there were no miracles. Countless rays of light drifted in the bedroom. After another half an hour, Li Guangtu still didn't wake up. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang stopped and seemed to observe Li Guangtu. He nodded and said, "There's no problem, but he probably still needs to rest, so he won't wake up for the time being." "How long?" Li Tianlan asked in a flat voice. "About 12 hours. Xianyuan Wushang answered after thinking for a while. "Let's go and eat something." Li Tianlan's figure flickered. He didn't stay in the bedroom. There was no need to leave any protective measures behind. His sword energy had completely covered every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Within the scope of his sword energy, every grass, every tree, and even every trace of air in Emperor Dong's palace turned into peerless sword light in an instant. Wherever the sword energy passed, it became Li Tianlan's home field. Xianyuan Wushang followed Li Tianlan, narrowing his eyes and observing silently. In this state, Li Tianlan moved very slowly. But everyone could be sure that Li Tianlan wasn't walking. His whole body was like a bad signal, appearing and disappearing from time to time, bringing an extremely unreal but absolutely real feeling. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through Emperor Dong's palace became a part of his body. He kept changing positions with the sword energy. In a sense, this was a kind of sharpening and practice for his swordsmanship. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through the field was him, but also not him. None of them were him. Xianyuan Wushang frowned. "Brother." This title naturally came out of his mouth. Li Tianlan also responded naturally. "Where is your real body?" Xianyuan Wushang's tone was a little complicated. Li Tianlan fell silent. He was silent for a long time. His figure flickered lightly in front of Xianyuan Wushang. Li Tianlan, who could flash without walking, didn't say softly until he was out of the castle, "Now it should be my real body." "Should be?" Xianyuan Wushang suddenly felt a little cold all over. "It doesn't matter." Li Tianlan shook his head. Xianyuan Wushang thought that if this wasn't important, what else was important? He had reached such a high level in swordsmanship that he wasn't even sure whether he was his real body or not. Can you walk now? Xianyuan Wushang smiled a little reluctantly, with a sense of testing. Li Tianlan nodded. But compared to walking, it saves more energy and is more focused. Xianyuan Wushang seemed to understand something, but also seemed to have a lot of things he didn't understand. He shook his head slightly and sighed. What's wrong? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Nothing. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said softly, I'm just thinking that in your current state, compared with Xianyuan Feng, who is also in his heyday with full energy, he paused and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Between you and it, who is the sharpest sword in the dark world? Chapter 1205. Li Tianlan smiled casually and did not answer Xianyuan Wushang's seemingly inexplicable question. He just said, Are you sure you only want a small clinic? Xianyuan Wushang stared blankly for a moment, then smiled. Of course, that suits me very well. Both Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian would join Emperor Dong's palace, which had been decided from the day they appeared. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace wasn't sure about Xianyuan Wushang's ability, so it didn't assign him any duties. After treating Xiao Mahai and Mochizuki Song, Xianyuan Wushang showed his ability, but the death of Chen Fangqing and other things messed up the situation. Although the situation was still turbulent, the internal situation of Emperor Dong's palace had stabilized. Li Tianlan naturally did not intend to let him be an idler. Go lead the biology lab. The controllable energy in Xianyuan Wushang was the purest vitality. If Xianyuan Wushang joined the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace, even if he knew nothing, he could improve the efficacy of the gene medicine that Emperor Dong's palace was developing by several levels with this energy alone. The clinic is good. I think it's the most suitable for me. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head without hesitation and said with a smile, I'm best at treating headaches, fever, colds, fever, and diarrhea. I'm really tired of looking at all the data, parameters, graphs, and combinations in the laboratory. As for the biological laboratory, I can roughly provide you with some formulas, but not much. It's probably going to be difficult to gather the materials, but that's about it. Xianyuan Wushang was now a holy disciple. The starting point for a holy disciple was level 1. There was a name that made Xianyuan Wushang feel a little helpless: nurse. In the current medical field, he was definitely an expert. Even the saint beside Lin Shi could not compare to him. However, under the current circumstances, he could not be of much help. He could naturally lead and play a role in the work of the biological laboratory. In fact, whether it was the biological laboratory headed by Nailan Shuriying in Emperor Dong's palace or the biological laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai that was unrivaled in the world, Xianyuan Wushang had experienced a long, long time ago. In theory, some of the topics that Nailan Shuriying was tackling, the various aspects of ideas, and the bottlenecks that she had encountered were not a problem in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. It was just like how most adults wouldn't be troubled by the question of 1 + 1. But the problem was that even if one knew the exact answer, if one's eyes couldn't see, ears couldn't hear, mouth couldn't speak, and hands couldn't move, he wouldn't be able to tell others the exact answer. Xianyuan Wushang wasn't blind or mute, but there were some things he couldn't do anything about. He knew what Nailan Shuriying and the Wang family of Beihai were attacking now. Here, it should be called the Eternal Third Generation. This was something developed by the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace when they first rose to power. Now, it was called the Dew of Life in those two forces. Anything that could increase one's vitality wouldn't be cheap anywhere, but the Dew of Life wasn't that rare either. At the very least, the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace, which consisted of hundreds of millions of human soldiers, regardless of whether they were elites or ordinary soldiers, would have a few bottles. As for the potions of the Life series, they were no longer named after generations, nor were they some sort of breakthrough improvement. The Dew of Life, the Blood of Life, the Torrent of Life, the Spring of Life, across lakes, rivers, oceans, and even the last treasure of the War God Realm, the Real Immortality Potion, each potion was countless times better. It was the real immortality potion that helped Li Tianlan directly enter the invincible realm from a seriously injured state. Even if it was absolutely suppressed by the real environment, it still played an incredible role. Judging from Xianyuan Wushang's real level, in theory, it wasn't difficult for him to make the Ocean of Life potion. In theory, that was to say, from a purely technical point of view, the problem was that there were no corresponding materials, let alone sophisticated equipment. The apostles around Linxi could make the equipment, but no one could do anything about the materials. If Qin Weibai completely returned to her peak state, she might be able to do it, but it was obviously impossible. Xianyuan Wushang could provide Emperor East with several gene potion formulas that could be made in the current environment. If he said anything more, not to mention whether he could do it, even if he could, it would go against his original intention as a guide. What about Xing Tian? Li Tianlan asked. In the final battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were in East Island. Compared with the low-key but mysterious Xianyuan Wushang, Xing Tian had a record of fighting. The only superior of the invincible realm that the sanctuary had cultivated for more than 2 years died in Xing Tian's hands. What was more tragic was that Li Tianlan still didn't know the name of the invincible realm expert, nor did the whole dark world. He said he wanted to be a PE teacher. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, "There is no school in Emperor East Palace now." Li Tianlan was expressionless, and his voice was a little cold. There was a school in Shenyuan City now, and Ning Chenqing also ambitiously proposed a plan to build Tianan University, but it was still far away. He couldn't just casually arrange Xing Tian to be a PE teacher in an ordinary school, could he? "You don't want to contribute to Shenyuan City," Li Tianlan said lightly. "We have no choice." Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and said seriously, "We can help, such as treating the injuries of Moongaze and Song. But we can help. It's difficult for me to do anything else. Our task is not to interfere with the development of Emperor East Palace. At least at this stage, Xing Tian and I can only be onlookers in Emperor East Palace." But Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. Xianyuan Wushang frowned and whispered, "Because the rise of Emperor East Palace must be real. Absolutely real." His voice seemed to be subconsciously heavier when he said the last few words. After a pause, Xianyuan Wushang continued with a smile, "Similarly, this is also my father's order." "Your father?" Li Tianlan nodded, as if he was thinking about the importance of the other party. He had a son like Xianyuan Wushang, and even a servant like Xing Tian? The importance of the other party was self-evident. But was there really such a person? If there was, where was he? "He's not as powerful as you think." Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, "At least here, if my father fought with you, he probably wouldn't be a match for you." He was referring to the current Li Tianlan and the energetic Ruthless. Although he didn't say it explicitly, it was not wrong to say it that way. He's been friends with you for a long time, and he really hopes to meet you at the right time. Xianyuan Wushang continued. "He knows me." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "We've been friends with each other for a long time." Xianyuan Wushang said, "I'm curious about what kind of person he is." Li Tianlan laughed. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated and whispered, "I'm not qualified to comment on my father. I think he's a great man, but he doesn't think so of himself." Li Tianlan looked back at him with interest. "How does he comment on himself? An unqualified guardian. Idiot." Li Tianlan looked at Xianyuan Wushang with a stiff expression. He had never met Xianyuan Wushang's father, but he knew that he was an unfathomable figure. To comment on himself as an idiot, he was indeed unfathomable. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he suddenly said, "What about me? What does your father think of me?" Xianyuan Wushang glanced at Li Tianlan weakly. His voice was even lower, as low as a mosquito's hum. "Big idiot." Chapter 1206. Xianyuan Wushang's father's evaluation of Li Tianlan, which seemed a little shocking now. Seeing that Li Tianlan didn't get angry, Xianyuan Wushang told him the whole evaluation. A qualified guardian, an unqualified shaper, a big idiot. This was the evaluation of Li Tianlan from the great emperor whom he had never met. Li Tianlan smiled faintly. He was really not angry. He was just a little curious about the person who called him a big idiot and even thought he was an idiot. After saying that he was looking forward to meeting him, they went to the dining hall of Emperor Dong's palace and ordered some food. Xianyuan Wushang gobbled up the food to replenish his energy. Li Tianlan casually fiddled with the rice in front of him, a little lost in thought. By the way, brother, I just found a problem and forgot to tell you. Xianyuan Wushang took a sip of Coke and sighed comfortably. This young fat man with a beer belly didn't like drinking. At first, he liked to carry a bucket of purified water and take a few sips from time to time. But this habit didn't last long, and he began to crazily like Coke, Fanta, Sprite, and other messy drinks. So far, it was said that Xianyuan Wushang's highest record was 12 bottles a day. 1-liter bottles. It was said that Xianyuan Wushang didn't drink water anymore. Whether in Yuzhou or Emperor Dong's palace, all he drank was Coke. Such brave deeds made Li Tianlan's scalp numb. He once reminded Xianyuan Wushang to be careful not to drink himself to death. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said he was not afraid because he was a doctor. Li Tianlan quietly thought that maybe soon he would find a small clinic in Emperor Dong's palace that had more Coke bottles than all kinds of medicine. Maybe it would develop into a hospital in the future. His eyes wandered and fell on Xianyuan Wushang's face. What's the matter? There's something wrong with Li Guangtu's body. Xianyuan Wushang thought and hesitated, as if he didn't know how to explain in detail. Finally, he shook his head. I've studied his martial arts. Perhaps in the dark world, this unique skill was not as famous as the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation and the 24 moves of sword. But in a sense, the immortality seal was derived from the 24 moves of sword. To be exact, it was derived from the 24 moves of sword and the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation. It takes into account most of the advantages of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword and the 24 moves of sword, but it also inherits the shortcomings of the 2 unique skills. The reason why Li Guangtu was able to reach his current level after his martial arts foundation was shattered is not only because of his amazing talent, but also because of the unique way of exerting power of the immortal seal. You should know this very well. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. The immortality seal derived from the 24 moves of swordsmanship was not difficult for Li Tianlan at the moment. The way this unique skill exerted force was indeed extremely strange. However, under normal circumstances, the combination of the 3 would be the complete sword, and it would also be the most realistic sword. On the other hand, the foundation of the undying seal was nothingness. This feeling was hard to explain in detail. To be exact, Li Guangtu was not in the invincible realm. It could even be said that he had no realm. After his martial arts foundation was shattered, it had never been repaired. To some extent, the immortality seal was beyond the scope of the sword energy and the sword intent. It could even be said to be the destructive power that erupted from the spirit and will. This was pure nothingness. Because it was not real, it was ever-changing and everywhere. All the destructive power of the immortality seal and all the sword energy of Li Guangtu could be regarded as the eruption of the spiritual power. He came to this day from a state where his martial arts were completely crippled. He used the experience of the past, which was illusory. When this illusory experience acted on his spirit and will, his spiritual power exploded with power similar to the 4 realms of martial arts. For example, the storm, the ice, the raging fire, the thunderbolt, and even the sword light of the invincible realm. Almost all the exertion of the immortality seal focused on the spiritual domain. Therefore, even if Li Guangtu was seriously injured, he still had a strong combat capability. As long as he was energetic and determined, the combat capability he could exert was almost unimaginable. Because his unique skill consumed not physical strength but spirit. I don't like this unique skill. Xianyuan Wushang said blandly, but it's very interesting. I heard that Senior Li used to be a world-famous master in the spiritual domain in the dark world. Although he didn't reach the so-called transcendent realm, he was infinitely close to this domain. So it should be normal for Li Guangtu to have some research in this field. The immortality seal is not hypnosis. Li Tianlan frowned. Of course not. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. The word hypnosis is very vivid. The immortality seal has nothing to do with hypnosis. This unique skill, to some extent, combines the sword energy of the 24 moves of sword, but it uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai. This is the core. Li Kuang-tu's spiritual outburst evolved into sword energy. Under that level of outburst, hypnosis becomes a very powerless thing. It can't be done, and there is no need to do it. A person who can resist that level of spiritual outburst is not hypnotized by that level of spiritual power. So what you mean is? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Spiritual power is a very magical thing. Xianyuan Wushang said softly, Big brother, your swordsmanship pursues reality and illusion. Then let me ask you a question. Do you know what the end of illusion is? It's reality, Li Tianlan said blandly. An answer full of the charm of order, and absolutely accurate. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes lit up. Have you ever thought about sister-in-law? He suddenly paused, shook his head subconsciously and changed the topic. Let's give an example. For example, the old man in the Holy Land. His spiritual power is in the so-called transcendent realm, and it is very stable. But the extent of his spiritual outburst is very poor, so he can only hypnotize the enemy, and it is more than enough to protect himself. Under such circumstances, I'm almost sure that even if you go to kill him, it will be difficult to succeed. But Li Kuang-tu is different. His spiritual power is not as strong as that of the old man in the Holy Land, but it is full of explosive power. He doesn't know how to use these things gently, so every time it erupts, it is uncontrollable, so he can't hypnotize others. The instantaneous eruption brings the most powerful lethality. You mean that spiritual power is illusory, but the end of illusion is reality, so Li Kuang-tu's spiritual power has reached the level where he can turn illusion into reality. He is far from it. Xianyuan Wushang twitched the corner of his mouth disdainfully. He only uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. For a short moment, his spiritual power can become close to reality, so there is the current sword energy and sword light. These things have lethality, but they can only exist for a moment. How can they be real? He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said softly, What is real should be eternal. Li Tianlan looked at him thoughtfully. What are you trying to say? It's still about spiritual power. Xianyuan Wushang lowered his head and took a big gulp of coke. Although there is a threshold for spiritual power at this stage, the threshold is very small compared to martial arts. Li Kuang-tu can't make any progress in martial arts. To be exact, he is actually a useless person. All his combat power is concentrated in spiritual power. If I'm not wrong, Li Kuang-tu's spiritual power should be very close to that of that old man in the Holy Land. Once he breaks through, Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. So, Xianyuan Wushang smiled. Now it seems that the biggest threat to you is Wang Xingxiao, who is integrating Wang Tianzong's sword energy. In fact, the biggest threat to you is Li Kuang-tu, but he doesn't know it himself. Chapter 1207. There was no need for Xianyuan Wushang to explain anything. Li Tianlan had already understood what he meant and knew what he had overlooked before. He was very familiar with the Undying Seal. In fact, he couldn't be more familiar with it. He knew every move of the Immortality Seal, including the comprehensive move, like the back of his hand, or it could be said that his fire was pure. He didn't steal from Li Kuang-tu. This unique skill itself was a branch of martial arts derived from the 24 moves of sword. He completely understood the 24 moves of sword, so he naturally understood the Immortality Seal. Therefore, Li Tianlan could also use the Immortality Seal, and it often worked wonders. Even in the same realm, the Immortality Seal in his hands was different from Li Kuang-tu's. The difference was not in anything else, but in terms of destructive power. Every move of the Immortality Seal in Li Tianlan's hands was more fierce and majestic than Li Kuang-tu's. But compared with Li Kuang-tu, he always lacked a trace of smoothness and freedom. Li Tianlan always thought that this was the problem, that his study of the 24 moves of sword was not thorough enough. In terms of overall understanding of the 24 moves of sword, he might be able to surpass Li Kuangtu in all aspects, but a different understanding of a certain sword could cause this situation. He knew that his essence was pointed out by Xianyuan Wushang, the fifth on the divine list. Li Kuangtu, whose combat capability had obviously surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, was still a useless man in essence. Li Tianlan could vaguely feel that Li Kuangtu's body was a little strange, but he never thought that it would be such a result. Li Kuangtu was not in the invincible realm. He didn't even have a realm. In the War of Treason, his destroyed martial arts foundation had never been repaired at all. The so-called immortality seal could reshape the foundation was alive from the beginning. His body was nourished by a large amount of vitality, so that the strength of his body returned to the peak state. As for the foundation, he never thought about it at all. Every move of the immortality seal that could destroy heaven and earth was essentially the power of the spiritual domain. The power of the mind was naturally more unpredictable and strange, but it was also naturally more mellow and free. Li Tianlan deeply mastered the 24 moves of sword, but he knew little about the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could copy Wang Xingxiao's 6 paths of reincarnation, but he could only copy it, not master it. In other words, if he fought with Wang Xingxiao and Wang Xingxiao didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation, he naturally couldn't use it either. But Li Kuangtu knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. The essence of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outburst. He combined this kind of essence with the 24 moves of sword and applied it to the spiritual field. From the outbreak of physical strength to the outbreak of spiritual strength, it was more natural, faster, and more bizarre. This was the true state of Li Kuangtu. There is no doubt that Li Kuangtu is a true genius. There is no doubt about that. There was undisguised admiration in Xianyuan Wushang's voice. From his point of view, the combination of the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation and the transfer from physical strength to spiritual strength was unimaginable. It could even be said that it was an almost coincidental result of the concentrated inspiration of absolute genius. For Li Tianlan, the significance of this matter was that Li Kuangtu had changed his fighting style, but how could it be so simple? From the perspective of the space-time corridor, this matter was completely equivalent to Li Kuangtu transferring his own authority. He had been transferred from the authority of a martial artist to the authority of the lawful camp. He had inadvertently touched the rules of the world and finally walked on the path represented by Qin Weibai. What did this mean? If this matter was spread back, the entire space-time corridor would be in an uproar. Perhaps Li Kuangtu's strength was nothing, but his success in the transfer of authority meant that the human clan could be more flexible under the starry sky in the future, and it also meant that the authority of neutrality was further expanded. He treated Li Kuangtu and controlled his physical data, so it would take him a long time to write the report to the space-time corridor. So, you mean that Li Kuangtu will break through soon? Li Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. Maybe it will be faster than you can imagine. Xianyuan Wushang smiled softly. In fact, I think that if he hadn't been in a state of injury in recent years, he might have succeeded in breaking through now. Big brother, you know what this means. Of course, Li Tianlan knew what it meant. Once Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, it was equivalent to him entering the supreme realm from another perspective. The old man in the Holy Land was the best example. In the spiritual field, the old man in the Holy Land was supreme. That kind of spiritual power could completely affect the current Li Tianlan. That old man without any martial arts might be the only person Li Tianlan couldn't kill now. And Li Kuangtu was different from that old man. His spiritual power was huge, but he didn't know how to use it conventionally at present, so Li Kuangtu didn't know hypnosis. But he knew what the old man in the Holy Land didn't know. The outburst of spiritual power. Even Li Tianlan felt it a little incredible when he thought about it, and he had to sigh at Li Kuangtu's genius. He mastered the essence of the outburst of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword and turned the outburst of physical strength into the outburst of spiritual power. If Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, his comprehensive combat capability would definitely not be weaker than that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. The destructive power might be a little weaker, but it was more unpredictable and impossible to guard against. A heavenly son who turned the spiritual power into martial arts. Li Tianlan was very confident, but he also knew very well that he was indeed invincible now. But if he fought against Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons, unless the ruthless energy was at its peak, he had less than a 30% chance of winning against Wang Tianzong at that time. Well, to be precise, the chance of winning was almost equal to 0. But now, according to Shenyuan Wuxiang, Li Kuangtu seemed to have reached the point where he could break through at any time. The premise was that his injury was healed. He really gave me a surprise. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed and whispered to himself, "Why him?" Shenyuan Wuxiang didn't say a word, bowing his head and gulping. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, saying calmly, "What do you think?" "I can't give any opinion." Shenyuan Wuxiang smiled innocently. "I just give the result. As for how to decide, it's all up to you. Kill him or let him go. Big brother, if you want to kill him, you have to be quick. Don't give face to anyone. His threat is beyond imagination. If you decide to let him go, then you have to ask Zhongzhou State to give you a good price." The melodious ringtone of the phone rang as soon as Shenyuan Wuxiang's voice fell. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. His eyes slightly narrowed, and then he picked it up and called the minister with a smile. Dongqing Wudi's slow but still steady voice sounded on the other end of the phone. "Tianlan, I'm coming to Emperor Dong's palace right now." Chapter 1208. Before the helicopter landed, Dongqing Wudi could clearly feel the almost boiling atmosphere in Emperor Dong's palace. He came quickly, and the news from the Dark World was one step faster. The new ranking list on the Divine List caused a sensation in the Dark World when Dongqing Wudi just entered the sky over Shenyuan City. When the helicopter landed on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace, it was greeted by the almost fanatical noise in every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the lawn and looked at Dongqing Wudi, who came out, with a smile on his face. "Tianlan, congratulations." Dongqing Wudi laughed. The relief that had been suppressed for many years was being released from his soul little by little. At this moment he seemed to be much younger. The youngest one on the Divine List, at least the next half a century is your time. Dongqing Wudi held Li Tianlan's hand tightly and sighed with emotion. "Now, those who are standing against us, I'm afraid they won't even be able to sleep well. The current Emperor Dong's palace deserves all this." Li Tianlan chuckled softly, looking relaxed. The ranking of the Divine List was a storm for the Dark World. For countries in the world, it was a comparison of strength in some aspects. On different occasions, the list had different meanings. But for the parties involved, what was the significance of the list? At least for Li Tianlan, it was meaningless. He had always believed that he was invincible. It didn't matter whether he was ranked first or last, or even not on the list. His opponents would not surrender without a fight just because he was the first on the Divine List, nor would they despise him because he was not on the Divine List. No matter how the list was arranged, it didn't mean much to Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do or didn't want to do would not change because of the list. The only effect might be to raise the morale a little. "You're the one who deserves all of this." Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. Li Tianlan followed Dongqing Wudi and said in a calm tone, "What do you think of Emperor Dong's palace, Minister?" "I don't have any opinion, but it's a suggestion." Dongqing Wudi looked around and said, "Now Emperor Dong's palace has the strength, but the development time is short, and the interior is still a little chaotic. This is a common problem for any new force, but any new force is not when it was first established. It was far more cohesive than the other forces. Do you know why?" He didn't wait for Li Tianlan's answer and said directly, "Because any new force has a clear goal at the beginning of its establishment. It has a clear goal, but there is no huge benefit for the time being. So everyone inside is struggling and wants to conquer everything outside. It was the same for Emperor Dong's palace in the beginning, but things are different now." It will be solved. Li Tianlan nodded. He agreed with Dongqing Wudi's view. In fact, not only Dongqing Wudi, but many people who had a deep understanding of the development process of Emperor Dong's palace had the same concern. Emperor Dong's palace was indeed a new power, and its internal cohesion was still there. But what was different from other new powers was that the interests within Emperor Dong's palace were enough to destroy anyone's rationality. Huge interests formed a chain of interests, which became more and more obvious inside Emperor Dong's palace. And it was certain that as Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the divine list, Emperor Dong's palace would absorb more and more interests in the future. Under such circumstances, an organization whose internal duties were not very clear was bound to have great hidden dangers. Perhaps because of Li Tianlan's existence, Emperor Dong's palace would not fall apart. But if Emperor Dong's palace fell into a quagmire of internal strife, it would undoubtedly be no good for its future development. They were the first group of people who followed Li Tianlan to conquer the country. Li Tianlan couldn't even deal with them seriously. Baidian and the people of Sai City are not right, are they? Dongqing Wudi asked calmly. As the focus of the whole dark world, Emperor Dong's palace had no secrets to some extent. Maybe there were many things that the dark world couldn't see clearly. But after Emperor Dong's palace merged with some forces of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City, after several meetings, everyone could feel the subtle relationship between Li Baitian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. The parliament of Zhongzhou State could naturally get the news. He's too sensitive. But at present, they are not at odds, but we do need to pay attention to it. Li Tianlan said softly. Do you know the reason? Dongqing Wudi smiled. It's not a secret. Li Tianlan also smiled, but he felt a little helpless. Li Baidian and Sai City. To be exact, the relationship between Mount Shu and Sai City had never been harmonious. Li Baitian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were in a tit-for-tat relationship. And there was also a knot between Saint and Situ Tsangyue. The reason was well known. Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, one of the 4 sword masters of Mount Shu, Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, and Li Shi, the current palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, had been passed down to this day. These 3 women could be said to be absolutely incompatible rivals in love. It sounded melodramatic, but it was the truth. After Li Guangtu failed at the border, he lost contact with the 3 of them. Li Shi became the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, Situ Tsangyue went to Mount Taibai, and Yun Qinshi still stayed in Mount Shu. As Li Shi quieted down, Situ Tsangyue, who later established Sai City, was directly targeted by Yun Qinshi. The contradiction between Mount Shu and Sai City had lasted for many years. This kind of contradiction, after Emperor Dong's palace absorbed Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu and Sai City, was directly brought to the inside of Emperor Dong's palace. However, after all, it was just a contradiction, not a hatred. So both sides behaved very restrained. Today's subtle relationship was just a long-accumulated unpleasantness, and they couldn't get over it for the time being. It was impossible for Li Baidian and Saint to fight with Sai City for Yun Qinshi. After all, now they were on the same side. And Yun Qinshi, as Li Guangtu's former woman, this Phantom Sword Master, who had followed Li Tianlan's Snowdance Corps to fight in Snow Country, was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Shortly after Li Guangtu's identity was exposed 2 years ago, she had joined the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Of the former 4 sword masters of Mount Shu, only Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master, was still in Mount Shu. Emperor Dong's palace will enter a period of rapid expansion next. I also intend to take advantage of this time to stabilize the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace. This matter is already being done. Minister, rest assured, everything is still under control. Li Tianlan said lightly. I have nothing to worry about. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. It's just a necessary reminder. Li Tianlan said, Minister, did you come here today for this? This was definitely a question that he knew the answer to. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly and said softly, How is Li Guangtu? Chapter 1209. Dongqing Wudi's voice echoed in the night, a little bitter, a little difficult, and a little dignified. What happened to Li Kuangtu now? The whole Zhongzhou state was very concerned about this issue. The news they got was that Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. As for what happened after that, all the news was cut off. Why did Dongqing Wudi come here in such a hurry? It could be said that he knew that the list of the divine list would be released in the near future, but the most important thing was to determine Li Kuangtu's state. Li Tianlan left a lot of memorable impressions in the dark world, all kinds of impressions. But no matter what kind of impressions they were, they had nothing to do with being good-tempered and easygoing. Radical, strong, crazy, indifferent, cruel, decisive, straightforward, and impulsive. He was in his early 20s, an age where no one would be surprised by what he did. Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. If they didn't agree with each other, it was entirely possible for Li Tianlan to kill him directly, and the possibility was not small. Dongqing Wudi never thought that Li Tianlan was a fool. Even if Li Tianlan couldn't see the current situation clearly, military counselor, saint, Xianxia, and even Li Shi, as well as the old people of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace, were enough to serve as the think tanks of Emperor Dong's palace. If Li Tianlan didn't pay attention to it, they would pay attention to it and tell Li Tianlan. So Li Tianlan must now know the importance of Li Kuangtu. This was also what made Dongqing Wudi most nervous. In his mind, Li Tianlan's answer was very important. If Li Tianlan killed Li Kuangtu before he came, there would be no need to say anything. On the contrary, if Li Kuangtu was still alive at this time, it meant that Li Tianlan was also waiting for the conditions of Zhongzhou state. At least it meant that this matter could be discussed, and it could be a happy ending. What Zhongzhou state needed was a living Li Kuangtu. If Li Tianlan killed him directly, Dongqing Wudi was not sure whether Zhongzhou state would fall out with Li Tianlan for a dead man. But if it really happened, there would be a lot of trouble. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Wudi and then laughed coldly. He's not dead yet? He's in a coma and he's badly injured. Dongqing Wudi let out a long breath without concealing it and whispered, "You don't want to kill him." Li Tianlan said calmly, "You don't want me to kill him?" Dongqing Wudi silently took out a cigarette and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took out a lighter and lit it for him. The two stood under the night sky of Tiannan and smoked. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. To be precise, it's the parliament that doesn't want you to kill him. Li Huaqing's intentions. Li Tianlan said blandly. It was not a question, but an affirmative statement. His voice was very calm, but just a simple address seemed to cause the surrounding temperature to drop. Dongqing Wudi's smoking hands stiffened for a moment. Before he could speak, Li Tianlan had already laughed. There seemed to be countless long swords in the sky and earth of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overwhelming sword energy was moving slowly. Li Tianlan's voice was a little cold. He said he would give me an explanation about Gu Xingyun, so I didn't make a fuss and waited for him to give me an explanation. But now, he didn't give me the explanation he wanted to give me. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the internal affairs of the Li family? Minister, do you think that if I take a step back, the parliament will think that I'm easy to bully? If I take a step back, the parliament will think that Emperor Dong's palace is a group of bloodless cowards? The night slowly twisted, and the majestic sword energy suddenly covered the starry sky. A huge vortex with a diameter of tens of thousands of meters formed over the entire Xianxia city in an instant. Li Tianlan's voice was low. What should I do to make the parliament understand what the real Emperor Dong's palace is? Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and reached out to press Li Tianlan's shoulder. Li Tianlan did not move. The vortex of sword energy in the sky began to disappear as his mood eased, but Xianxia city under the night sky was bitterly cold. Dongqing Wudi frowned. He found that he seemed to have misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. Originally, he thought that there would only be two results when he came here. The first was that Li Kuangtu had been killed, and the second was that Li Kuangtu was alive, which meant that Li Tianlan was also ready to negotiate. But now it seemed that it was not the case at all. He sighed and said slowly, "What are you going to do about Li Kuangtu?" "He won't die." Li Tianlan said faintly, I won't kill him for Grandpa or for Rushi. But there is always a price to pay for doing something wrong. When he wakes up, I will talk to him. If he can realize his mistake, it will be the best. If he doesn't know his mistake, I will find a place to let him calm down and reflect on it slowly until he figures it out. Do you want to imprison him? Dongqing Wudi's face changed slightly. Li Tianlan did not speak, but looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Zhongzhou State? Zhongzhou State needs the power of the purgatory of heaven capital. Dongqing Wudi hesitated. What Li Huaqing needs is checks and balances. The power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan corrected Dongqing Wudi's statement. The purgatory of heaven capital is a part of the Li family, and the Li family is mine. This is my Li family. Isn't it ridiculous that he wants to use my things to check and balance me and even stop me? What are you going to do? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time, and then he sighed deeply. What's your attitude, Minister? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He stopped where he was and looked at Dongqing Wudi silently. Dongqing Wudi also stopped and looked at Li Tianlan quietly. There was no dissatisfaction, no sharpness, no hostility in Li Tianlan's eyes, and they were not so deep and unpredictable. He just looked at Dongqing Wudi silently, and his eyes were even a little dull, without any emotion. Dongqing Wudi's heart twitched fiercely. At this moment he stood very close to his son, but the gap in their thinking was very far. The parliament is very sincere. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice. The president is willing to do his best to help the new group rise. After Nanyue, he is willing to give Beijiang to the new group. At present, although the new group does not have enough cutting-edge power, if it is willing to talk, it may be possible to make an exception and promote one. And you know very well what Beijiang means. I can also tell you that this is not all. As long as you are willing to talk, the new group will get more, and even the Border Control Corps is not out of the question. The attitude of the parliament is actually very clear. They don't mind the strength of Emperor Dong's palace. They are afraid that an unrivaled Emperor Dong's palace will lose its goal in the future. As for me, Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and said, if you are not going to kill Li Kuangtu, I have no attitude. I am just a lobbyist, but I am not going to persuade you. After a long silence, Dongqing Wudi seemed to have made up his mind and said faintly, you are my son, whether you admit it or not, it is a fact. Therefore, your attitude is my attitude. I support any decision you make, but I hope your decision is rational. This was the first time that Dongqing Wudi had clearly talked about Li Tianlan's life experience. Although Li Tianlan had understood it before, Li Tianlan's body was stiff in place. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, thank you. The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone, looked down at the screen, narrowed his eyes and whispered, Li Huaqing is here. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.